Hello, brothers and sisters in Christ, and welcome to another episode of Reasons to Believe. My name's Matthew Petrusek, and it's a great joy for me to be with you again. So, as I noted last time when we were looking at the question of hope and the relationship between hope and optimism, and why hope is the right answer, that our Catholic faith has excellent answers not only to perennial problems, again, problems that have always been around, problems that are embedded in the human condition, they do, but also to problems that we're dealing with right here and right now, both domestically in the United States and also internationally as well. And one of those fundamental problems actually has a lot to do with the problem of language. And in particular, a contemporary issue of using generalities in order to compel people to either say things that they don't believe, or at least not say things if they do disagree. Now, what am I getting at here? One of the problems that we're encountering right now is that there's certain words, certain very powerful words that are in our culture, that are in our political lexicon, in our moral lexicon, that carry great weight to them, but it's not always clear exactly what they mean. So to give you an excellent example in terms of it being very apropos of the moment we're living through right now, think of the word social justice, the two words social justice. So when someone says to you, are you for social justice? What does your answer have to be, right? You have to say, yeah, I'm for social justice, right? Because how could you say, no, I'm against social justice? That would imply that you're some kind of bad person, that you're against justice as it applies broadly to society. But the question, of course, is, well, what do you mean by social justice? But oftentimes, the definition that the person who's asking you or is sort of compelling you to take, embedded inside the word social justice, is something completely different than you have in mind, but it's already too late because you've agreed that you're for social justice. What are some other big words that we're dealing with right now in this political, moral, and cultural moment? How about the word diversity? Are you for diversity? How could you say no? I could just say, no, I don't think there should be any kind of difference whatsoever, right? But again, what's the saying? The devil's in the detail. Or the word inclusion. Are you for or against inclusion? Well, of course you have to say, I'm for inclusion. I don't want to be a playground bully and keep people out. But then, of course, it's inclusion into what group, defined by what criteria. So these words, again, carry great moral weight, but we have to figure out, we have to specify exactly what they mean. Because if we don't, we can end up being cornered in very different ways, but ultimately being in a position where we're not able to practice our faith into either saying things that we don't believe or, again, into silence. Now, how does that relate to today's topic? The question of love, the word love is also in that category. Now, it's sort of remarkable from a historical standpoint that when we look at, again, the political landscape, the word love is very commonly used. In fact, it's in the contemporary presidential campaign, you hear it very frequently, and one side seems to be associating itself with love. And again, it's one of those words you can say, well, are you for love or are you against love? Again, your answer has to be, well, I guess I'm for love, right? I don't want to be against love. Don't want to be a hater, right? But what does love mean? That's what we're going to be getting at today, and looking at competing conceptions of the definition of love and how and why the Christian conception of love ultimately is superior. Now, in order to get there, here's the topic, right? Is love all we need? Now, I'm not so old that I actually remember the Beatles, and the famous Beatles song is, love is all you need. But I've heard it enough, right? So I'm old enough to have heard it many, many times. So there's this basic idea, right? If we just have love, then everything else will fall into place. Now, I'm actually going to agree with that statement by the end of our discussion today. In fact, love is all we need, but we have to define it properly. So that's what I mean to do here with these two categories: the secular conception of love versus the Christian conception of love. And as before, what I'm going to be doing is looking at some sort of classical definitions that'll help us move forward the different ways of framing the question. So let me start with the secular conception of love. The first point to make here is what I mean by secular is non-religious, more specifically non-Christian. Secular itself is a loaded word. It can mean many, many different things. And in fact, within a Christian context, we could use the word secular to mean the natural world versus, in contradistinction to the supernatural world. So secular in and of itself isn't a quote-unquote bad word. The way that I'm using it today, however, I particularly mean it to signal a way of thinking, a political space, a moral space, a social space where God is deliberately absent, right? So it's not just something that people have drifted into, but rather have made a choice to say, we're going to create both a foundation and an atmosphere that has no reference to God whatsoever. That's how I'm using the word secular today. So then the question is, well, what is the secular conception of love? And the first two characteristics are that it is inherently tied to the conception of desire and to the conception of feeling. Now, if we had a lot of time, which we don't, we could start making some distinctions between desires and feelings and how that relates to attraction more broadly, to our appetites. But for our sakes and purposes, we'll just stick to this idea of desire and feeling basically meaning the same thing. So the secular conception of love has at its heart this idea that what it is to love somebody is to have a desire for them, or to have some kind of positive feeling of attraction towards them. So to love somebody is to, if you can think of it as a kind of a magnetic force, is here's the object of your love, and to love them is to feel drawn to them, to feel compelled to move towards them. Now, that in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, what I want to do is begin to refer to the classical Greek words for love to help us sort this out. In the classical Greek language, which was just tailor-made for philosophical discourse, there's actually 3 words for love. I'm going to get to the third, agape, in just a little bit. But the first 2 are eros and philia. So eros is where we get our word erotic. It does include sexual attraction. It does include that, but it's not just reducible to sexual attraction. Basically, the idea behind eros is that you as the lover, in relationship to the beloved, basically you want no space between you whatsoever. So to have erotic love, to have an eros form of love, means that you want total unity with the object of the beloved. So you can see immediately what that has to do with desire and feeling. Okay, but there's also this conception of what's called philia. Philia is the Greek word, or related to the Greek word for friendship. And it's also, for example, where we get the name of our city, Philadelphia, right, the city of brotherly love. Now, philia also is related to desire and feelings. However, there's a fundamental difference between philia and eros, in that philia doesn't desire no space in terms of its attraction. It actually desires space. So you still feel an attraction. You still feel compelled to be close to the beloved, to the object of your love. But by definition, if you're in a relationship of philia, by definition, you want to preserve that space. And so that's why, as the kids say nowadays, I'm in the friend zone, right? So what does it mean to be in the friend zone? It means there's a space around me that prevents you from getting into the realm of eros. So, as with eros, there's nothing wrong with philia in and of itself. These forms of love are part of human nature. In fact, we could say from a Christian perspective already, even though we haven't jumped into that category yet, that they're natural to us, and they're part of the goodness of our created nature and what it means to be human and to express ourselves in our full humanity. So in no way, shape, or form do I want to give the impression that eros and philia are bad. However, we are going to see that they're incomplete. We'll get there. At the heart of eros and philia, what they both share, even though they're distinct between themselves, is that they're both, what? Conditional. Conditional. They're contingent. They depend on two things, minimum. One is they depend upon me actually being attracted, me actually having desire for the object of the beloved, of the person, right? If I don't feel attraction, if I don't feel desire, then again, by definition, I don't have any love. Okay, condition number one. Condition number two, there's a kind of reciprocation that's built in it as well. What do I mean by that? Well, if I have a eros form of love for someone, and they don't have that eros form of love back for me, then there's no completed eros form of love there, right? That's actually sad. That's called heartbreak. If you really, really desire somebody and they don't desire you back, then there's no relationship. So it's contingent both upon your feelings for the other person and their feelings for you. So in that sense, if either one of those categories doesn't hold, then you don't have a relationship. Now, I want to pause just very briefly and say, that's a big deal, right? We have to recognize the importance of that, because what we're saying is, if we only have eros and philia, if those are only two forms of love, then there's no permanent love, right? There's no love that we can understand as existing no matter what, because the conditionality is built into the relationship itself. Okay. Within the secular, not only is this love conditional, the only real constraint it has, or ordering principle it has, is consent. The highest and only good of the secular conception of love is consent. Another word that oftentimes comes up in this context is autonomy, which again, going back to the Greek, it means autonomos, or being a law nomos unto oneself, auto. So the question is well, is this a good love or is this a bad love? The only possible tool that secular love gives you to answer that question is to say, well, is there consent involved? Do both parties say yes? Now, here we have to pause and recognize that even though we're in the realm of love here, this is exceedingly legalistic, right? It's basically understood as two parties coming together and both being in agreement on the nature and desire of their feelings. Each one signing a contract saying that, look, I'm going to be in this relationship so long and so forth as both I desire you and you desire me, and if and when that happens, that ends at any moment, I am free to leave. Sort of sign here, and now we can have a relationship. Well, that's how secular love goes. It's only consent, and anything else that we might pack into the relationship is optional. I mean, you can add additional things if you want to, but consent is the highest good. Okay, secular conception of love. How does this compare to the Christian understanding of love? The Christian understanding of love, I must emphasize, embraces desire. In fact, one of the most potent forces within the spiritual life, this goes deep into the history of our church and the history of spirituality in particular, is something we call holy desire. It's a desire to it's a compelling force inside of you that moves you to be one with God, to be one with Christ. And Pope Benedict XVI has actually spoken much about the importance of desire in the life of the Christian, both as it relates to a relationship with God and as it relates to a relationship with others. So there's nothing wrong with desire in and of itself. That also includes feelings. This oftentimes can be a critique of Christianity coming from the secular side as, well, you people aren't really interested in happy human beings. You want people to walk around with dour faces, carrying their cross and doing what they have to do, but not really caring about what's going on in the inside of them. And let me flat out say, there's nothing further from the truth. Again, what it means to be Christian, ultimately, is to be fully alive. It means to be fully human. So anything built into us, given to us by our Creator, and that includes desires, that includes feelings, the full expression of that, properly understood, is part and parcel of what it means for us to be fully alive in our relationships with each other and our relationship with Christ. So let's just put that to rest, that Christianity somehow is not concerned with desire or feelings or wants to kind of like extinguish them somehow. Not true, not true. However, and I can't stress this enough, desire and feelings are complemented by what we might call duty. Now, duty can also be associated with other forms of morality that are different from Christianity, but it fits here as well. So what is duty? Duty means doing the right thing no matter what. No matter what, you see. So independent of what you're feeling, independent of what your desires are, you do what you should be doing because it's good. What motivates you to act when you're under the category of duty as your principle is it good? Not what do I feel? Okay. So with duty, we can associate that with a third form of love. We already talked about eros and philia. A third form of love known as, in the Greek, agape. Translated into Latin, we get caritas, and from that we get our word charity. But I must stress here, agape, caritas, charity does not simply mean giving alms to the poor, for example. That's one example of it, but it's not reducible to that. Agape at its heart means loving the other person as another person simply because they are another person. You love them because they are good, and they are good because they are created in the image and likeness of God, just like you. And you have that disposition to your neighbor, whoever that neighbor may be, no matter what. That gets back to this idea of duty. Okay, so we can already see at this point that the Christian conception of love is threefold. It includes eros, so it includes the attraction. It includes philia, it includes friendship. But it also is all founded upon agape. So what does that mean? The Christian conception of love includes love that is both conditional, so it depends, and unconditional. And it doesn't want to tear those two things apart. Why? Because let's say you have a very good friend, and so you're engaged in a relationship of philia, and for whatever reason, that person changes profoundly and becomes abusive, becomes somebody who's leading you in a path that's away from the path of Christ. Christianity does not say, our faith does not say, you know what, you need to continue to be that person's friend even if they're being abusive to you. I mean, you still have to go hang out with them. You still have to go golfing with them. You still have to go to dinner with them. You still have to call them up on the phone all the time. That would be abusive, right? That would be saying you are obligated to do things that are going to hurt you. It does not say this. And again, this is such a big deal right now, because that is one of the biggest critiques of Christianity, again, coming from this side, is you Christians are always forcing people to be in abusive relationships. Even if it tears them apart, you say that what it is to have Christian love is to force people to be in the kinds of networks that ultimately tear them down. So you're not interested in actually building people up. False, 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 false. So going back to that idea of the friendship, if you're in a toxic friendship, then you have every right, in fact, even every obligation to end it. Right? You don't have to stay in an abusive relationship, but you never stop willing the good of that person, you see. No matter what kind of personal relationship you have, whether you're on good terms or bad terms, you always will what's good for them. You never will them something that's bad. You never wish for bad things to happen to them. And to the extent that it's possible, and maybe in very toxic relationships, there's very little you can do, but to the extent that it's possible, you seek to do everything within your power to help that person to become good again, to join the right path. Okay? So there's no reason to stay in an abusive relationship, but we never stop willing the good of those who are doing the abusing. And I want to add here very briefly that this includes within marriage. So the church teaches that if you're in an abusive relationship, while getting a divorce is prohibited, if you're in an abusive relationship, you don't have to physically stay with that person. That's not part of the cross. And part of the reason is, and this is a big part of the reason, is you're not helping the other person to get to heaven, to put it sort of most bluntly, by enabling them to treat you in a way that is sinful. So let's just make that clear right now. Right? Loving somebody never includes allowing them to abuse you, but it always includes always seeking their good no matter what. So this gets to the last characteristic of the Christian conception of love here. It includes consent. Right? Of course it includes consent. There's no marriage, we might say, with eros. There's no philia, there's no friendship. And actually, now that I've talked about marriage, I have to say marriage is actually the unity of eros, philia, and agape. But independently, there's no eros, there's no philia without consent. That's part and parcel of it. But again, it's not limited to consent. Insofar as it's related to agape, ultimately what love is about from a Christian perspective is seeking the objective good of the other person. Let me say that again. Seeking the objective good of the other. What is truly good for them. And here's a big point to make on this. What truly might be good for a person, for someone else, or even for oneself, even for me, like what might be truly good for me, may be completely opposed to what I want and to what I'm feeling. I can't stress that enough. Insofar as we're thinking about what the fullness of love is, desire and feelings are important. But anytime that our desires and our feelings are leading us away from what is objectively good, then we must defer to what is good, even if that means going against our desires and our feelings. Now, I'm going to end here by noting 3 implications of why this matters in a very practical sense. But before I do, I want to say, well, you know, a secular person could come and say, well, I have agape too. Why are you saying that you need God in order to have agape? Why can't I say that my love for my friend is unconditional or my love for my spouse is unconditional? That someone could say that seems like it's unjustified. It's not fair for you to say that. We can be unconditional in our love as well. Now, somebody can say that, of course. The question is underneath their words and underneath their idea, is there a coherent foundation to it? Now, here's the challenge that I would put forth to that claim. If you're on this side in the secular conception of love, part and parcel of belonging to this kingdom, as it were, is you don't believe that there's any objective good that's universal for all people. Remember, the hallmark of what's good for a secular conception of love is just, do you consent? So anybody can say anything or can desire anything they want. They can feel anything they want. They can even express any of those desires and feelings so long as they have consent. Now, does that actually work out, though? Does that actually lead to people's true goodness? This gets us to the 3 implications for why this matters. So why do we need Christian love? Why isn't secular love just enough? The first answer is things fall apart eventually without God at the heart of your foundation of love. Why? Without the objective good at the foundation of love. Why? Well, individually, if I tell myself, I love whatever I love, and that's based only on my desires and my feelings, well, what happens when my desires and my feelings, for example, lead me down a path of destruction? The classic example is somebody who's addicted to drugs or to any other substance, right? They desire something that is poison for them, and so just saying I'm going to act according to my desires alone, and so long as I consent to it, and I do, is what is true love, is to say that I love my own death, right? So individually, if you just rely on your own desires and feelings, you're not going to get very far. It's going to be catastrophic. It has social implications as well. Why? Well, remember, if love is only based on desire and feelings, and that in turn is only based upon conditionality, basically what we have, if we socialize that, if we spread that across the entire society, is that There's nothing permanent. There's no permanent values because people are only engaged in activities that somehow are related to their self-interest as it relates to their desire and feelings. So love ultimately is just an expression of something that I want. And if all of us are only engaged in transactional relationships based upon what we want, then nothing will actually hold us all together in the end. And perhaps we're seeing that right now in our own day and age. The second reason why this is so important is that once we put these two into contradistinction with each other, we begin to get a sense of sort of the absurdity of consent alone as being our highest good. I gave you the example of a drug addict, someone who's consenting. You can say, well, maybe when they have, when they're actually an addict, they're not consenting, but at some point along the line, they were consenting to get there, in most cases at least. But why can't people consent to sell themselves into slavery? Why people can't consent to give all of their organs away for a certain sum of money, to sell them, I mean. Why people can consent, I know this is dark, but we have to state it. Why can't there be a opening of suicide clinics across the country where you can go in just because you fill out the right forms and you can end it for whatever reason that you want because you decided it. Right, so once we push on this idea of consent, we start to see some very dark things lying behind it. And that pushes us back to this idea that, well, maybe consent isn't the highest good. Maybe there's an actual highest good. And that gets us to the final point here is the proper understanding of freedom as it relates to love. And here in these concluding comments, I'm really inspired by the words of the theology of St. John Paul II, who wrote extensively on this. The secular idea of freedom, as we should already be able to see right here, is that it's my choice to act upon my desires no matter what. So all these objects are out here. I desire this object, this person, this person, this person. And so what it is to be free is to be able to act on those desires. But freedom properly understood, again, is not related just to your desires. It's to what is objectively good. It's what's actually good for you. And to use a simple example, but I think it's totally appropriate for what we're talking about, is think of the proper functioning of your organ, right? One of your liver or something like that. So I am free, for example, to drink a fifth of vodka every night. And I can do that. Like it's my choice, my body, my choice, right? But that's just a freedom to destroy myself. My body has a certain kind of nature to it. And what it is to truly be free is to act in accordance with that nature. Well, that's the same as the soul itself. What it is to be free is to act in such a way so that I seek the true good, both for myself and for other people. So to conclude, is love all you need? Yes, so long as we amend it and say, all you need is God's